Meeting at the crossroads where the two forbidden subjects of religion and politics intersect. This is the Sophie Scholl Roundtable. I'm Mel McGinnis. To my left is Kurt Olson. To my right is Garrett Kane. And there's been a lot of stuff in the news relating to politics and religion. We heard, of course, the big demonstration, the big gathering there in Washington, D.C. last week, as well as the riot, you might say, that broke out. We also heard about the impeachment. Was that really an impeachment? Or was that more like a kangaroo setup for what the Democrats wanted to do vindictively? Well, this is some things we're going to talk about today. So, Kurt, you'd like to start off? What's your thoughts about the past week, 7 days?
The past 7 days are almost surreal in terms of what's happened. We've gone from a normal process of certifying electoral votes to whatever that was, and I hope we get into that, and now impeachment because of that. And usually we fear what the Congress does in a lame duck session in the spending of our money, and they did spend our money. But they've kind of bellied up to the bar, and they kind of raised the stakes with everything that's happened just in recent days. I mean, that's how I would describe it, just shortly, briefly.
Garrett, how about on your end?
As a libertarian, I need to suppress a certain feeling of schadenfreude of this whole thing. I mean, it's terrible, and that's why I say suppress it, because it's a shame, and it's not a good look on our country internationally or domestically. But me and my party have kind of been saying it for years that the system is broken. And how is it broken? I mean, there's multiple facets. We have the national security state, we have the welfare state, and we have election law that just got out of hand in terms of the changes that were made in a short amount of time. And our former vice presidential candidate put it really well shortly after the riots that, tensions on both the left and the right have overflowed in 2020 and into 21, and it's often misdirected at the other side versus where it should be directed, which is the political elite and basically the deep state that's got us into this mess.
And speaking of mess, it certainly turned out to be a mess a week ago. That is on January the 6th. And it was so interesting to see all what converged there.
Yes. I mean, I never got what I missed, I guess, was a final count of the number of people that were there. I can only assume it was hundreds of thousands. But I've started coming across people that were actually there, and people giving accounts of what they were seeing and what it looked like they were seeing, and that's interesting, especially in light of the fact that there are reports that what started unfolding at Capitol Hill started when the president was still talking several hundred yards down the National Mall at the Ellipse. And if there's a blaming going on and responsibility going on, those two things don't seem to intersect somewhere. There's something missing.
I would argue that, the tension was there and at a boiling point before the president said anything. And
Sure,
hindsight's
sure.
2020, and I really think that the whole situation of breaching the Capitol stinks to high heaven in terms
Yeah.
of how easily and how easily people got in there and how little resistance they met to that. But I think regardless of whether Trump would have spoke or not, I think it may have happened. And like I said, the fact that it happened so easily stinks of almost a deep state setup of let's let this happen. Of course, there were obviously Trump supporters who got engaged in foolish behavior, but I think maybe the master plan might have been let's let this happen because this will be the proverbial nail in the coffin for Trumpism. And be darned the consequences in terms of lost life and damaged property.
It's interesting you say that because multiple people, some people who I know who were there, and other accounts that I have read, people who were there, there's one consistent thing. They were shocked by the lack of police presence. They were shocked by the lack of police presence around the mall where the mass crowd was. And certainly as you got closer and closer to Capitol Hill, it's a consistent theme. Lack of security.
Which is consistent with reports I've heard that the FBI knew about something going on even a week before this all took place. There seemed to be intelligence out there which indicated there could be trouble. And not only that, but I also heard that denials to requests for National Guard being there also was a factor.
Yes. And something that's probably getting lost to some degree, the leadership of the House and the Senate has some responsibility for what happens in the building and at that location. And I don't hear anyone talking to Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell about what they did or didn't do in advance. Everything is focused on the guy down 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Right. And would you say, because we keep hearing, he incited a riot? For me, the language of what he was saying did not incite a riot. Yeah, he may have used some words that were strong, but he also said, you're to march peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol. In no way does that incite people to break through, go in, ruin things, and carry on in a way that is opposed to law and order.
Exactly. Yeah.
I do want to point out like the contrast, I think, and there's been a lot of whataboutism in comparison of what went down on the 6th versus what happened all summer around what were termed mostly peaceful protests in terms of Black Lives Matter. At least the right, I think, directed their frustration at the correct responsible parties, which is our congressional and Senate representatives, where Black Lives Matter directed their frustration at private businesses, private citizens, their own neighborhoods. Whereas if they had their sights focused on the real problem, the people that created the welfare state, which is the main thing keeping minority populations down, along with the drug war, they would have been right there on the Capitol steps instead of in our streets in every major city in the country.
Although I would also say that it seems like there's a segment within Black Lives Matter that just wants capitalism ruined,
Yes.
completely devastated.
Yeah,
so why not go after the small business? But Garrett, I think you bring up an excellent point. The contrast there with what took place in D.C. versus what we observed during the summer.
What's I find even more bothersome is some of the rhetoric by some of the. I've heard it from Nancy Pelosi. You hear from other people on the left. Because most, if not all, of the people that breached the Congress and entered and broke things and potentially even stole a computer, because most of those people were white, it's immediately characterized in identity politics that these people obviously were engaging in white privilege and white supremacy, and we've completely just lost the fact that personal responsibility. People, you committed a crime, you're responsible for it, you get punished for it.
Exactly. I thought I heard Gerald Nadler yesterday blame it on white supremacy. Those who were there. And I think they even brought it into the impeachment. I said, what are you talking about? Whereas, like you say, Kurt, it's about personal responsibility for what was broken, what was done.
Yeah, you don't have to put a color on lack of wisdom and foolish behavior, and that's what it was. And there's been plenty of it, across the racial spectrum.
Exactly. Let's be real here. What we saw during the summer in multiple large metropolitan areas was mob rule, and what we saw in D.C. on the 6th was another example of mob rule. Period. And you get a bunch of people together engaged in stupidity. Yep. Lack of wisdom, lack of everything, pretty much. This kind of stuff, don't excuse it at all. Don't condone it at all. But it's basically a cauldron of all the dynamics for all that to happen.
I think you're right. And I also feel like those who went into the Capitol, ransacking an office, walking out with a lectern, were followed up by people who weren't there to create trouble, but they saw the doors open and so went in anyways.
That's probably what happened. And it's going to be interesting when, now, if you see the press, they describe it as the biggest manhunt in American history. Of course, you got to have a little drama there. They kind of couch it in the terms of like we're watching a 2-hour movie and Jack Bauer or Harrison Ford's involved. But whatever comes of this, we're going to have people of varying dynamics. But I do think the evidence is indicating that we are going to see a bunch of people that fall into a certain category on the fringe.
Yeah, I would say.
Fringe
right.
Fringe right.
Yep. And whatever element of Antifa was there or not there, you couldn't help but notice people saying, that, stop Antifa, stop.
Exactly.
So I don't know. I don't know what the truth is on that. Yeah. Were there elements of Antifa there? I really don't know. I would like somebody to prove it.
Yeah.
Though the perception down there amongst right-leaning people was that there were Antifa elements included.
And let's be clear about Antifa. Most of those folks are white. If you followed the arrest of people in Portland and various other places, most of the folks in Antifa are whites. Yep. Period.
Yeah, and I thought I saw also somebody who was associated with Black Lives Matter there at the Capitol as well. I don't remember the individual's name, but he fit the profile, in other words.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, well, I think we're going to wrap it up here on this session of the Sophie Scholl Roundtable. Next session, we're going to get into how this has impacted the church. In other words, what we've seen in Washington, D.C., how has that made the church look through this? With that being said, join us next time for the Sophie Scholl Roundtable.